I want to introduce Erwin Hipsman and Howard Fields. Howard Fields is back from day one. He's also one of the co-founders of the CustomerX community. And so I'm going to turn it over to them and let them talk about the maturity model for customer marketing.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jeff. And it's great to meet some new people and also reconnect with people I've been chatting with over the years. And I work for Swiss-based NextThing. It's really interesting working for first time ever, I've worked for a global company headquarters outside of the US. And this month, we just had two major milestones. One is we crossed the $100 million in ARR. And then second is Forrester released their new wave on what they call end user experience management. And we were named one of two leaders. So that's both the first for me in my whole career, was to get Forrester leader and to be bringing a fair amount of revenue. And so NextThing is in the digital employee experience space, and we help IT move from being reactive to proactive with their employees. And I'll leave it at that. This is the third time I've been doing a customer marketing startup and organization. I've lived in customer success, I've lived in marketing, and now I live in marketing again. And one thing I've noticed, and this is really iterating off of, this presentation is iterating off of that, in most of the organizations I've been at, is that customer success and or sales are usually asked to measure customer maturity at some point. And there's a model that the company sets up as to what's that level 1 to 4, with the, and their goal is we need to move, 30% of our customers up one level this year. And because that will increase stickiness, more mature, it'll increase renewal rates, and speaks to upsell and expansion. And so I thought it'd be time to turn the table on ourselves, especially as we're planning for 2021. And let's look at ourselves and how mature is your engagement program? What programs will you de-emphasize, double down on, and start? But before we start, Jeff, I need you to run this question is, without knowing what the rubrics and the models and the definitions are, I just want people to say, how mature do you think your customer marketing program is now? I'm going to ask this same question later, and some people may raise their scores or lower their scores based upon the models that we present. So I'll leave this running for a few more seconds. So a lot of people at 2 seems to be the biggest. Very few at level 4, which makes sense, and you'll see why in a little bit later. I guess I can end the polling and share the results. And so people see that the largest number of people are 1s and 2s, which is good because now we've got a something to aspire for, and some of this will be aspirational. And let's get rid of this. Perfect. So I'll present 3 maturity models, and we'll come back to this slide later. We'll dig in a little bit deeper. But you can see what the evolution is. I think that intellectually will make sense to people. So if I ask people now, I'm curious if anybody would change their score just by seeing the definitions, but we'll leave that for a little bit later. And then on the left-hand side, there are, what are the programs? So that's the core, are the programs, what are your engagement programs and who is running them across the organization? The second one is internal alignment. And my experience says that the only thing harder than wrangling customers is wrangling the people in your own company. Everyone's got, the one thing I tell everyone I work with is you got to remember everybody's trying to move the ball forward. Nobody's, trying to cut you off the knees. No one's trying to, not get the work done. Everyone's trying to move their ball forward. But the reality is that windows do open and windows do close. So for your ideas for this engagement program or that engagement program, and by staying close to others, you get a feel for when a window might be open and when, why am I bothering to ask? Because I just know the product team is so deep into the major release for the year, this is not the right time to be asking for whatever it is you might be asking for. And the final thing is, words do matter. And when you listen to the language that people talk about when they talk about customers, I'll give you some hints into where you are at the maturity level. I just want to hide this 1 second. So the way I look at it, the first step is data. Lower left-hand corner is that's the foundation from everything. Without good data, you really can't do anything. And sort of the way over the years I've sort of been able to evolve it is that the customer success team is responsible for the individual's data. Who are the product champions, who are the executive sponsors, they know the people. We generally don't have that one-to-one relationship with the number of customers that customer success will have. On the other hand, customer marketing, I think, is responsible for account data. Do we know where every account is? Do we know what they have? Do we know their publicity status? I literally, when I joined NextThink, went through every contract to determine what is in the contract about the company's publicity status, got the Salesforce Ops team to create a form, and now it's very easy for anybody to say, can we use their logo? Now, I even took a screenshot of that clause in the contract and put it in the attachments tab. So yes, it tells you yes, no, maybe, written permission, not written permission, but they can easily see what the clause actually says. That's what I mean by account data. You want to have that available to everybody. And then when you think of programs, I think of them as, it's almost like a 3D chessboard. And we're going to dive into the programs in a second. One is, what are those programs that develop relationship versus reach? So relationship would be customer advisory board. Reach would be the newsletter. You can't have all programs that develop relationships, nor can you have all programs that just reach a lot of people. And a healthy program, if you were to take this slide afterwards and map your program to it, you'd want to have a few in each of these boxes. The other way to look at it is some programs are focused on new logo. So for example, if you're active on G2 Crowd or Gartner Peer Insights or any of the other peer review sites, that's really an action for new logos. Yes, customers are writing the reviews, but the people who are consuming it are prospects, maybe early stage, late stage, but that's the focus of that activity. Upsell, things like user groups would be, you could argue that user groups are more for adoption, but I would also argue that user groups are really, great places to talk about upsell or introduce things that somebody might want to buy in upsell mode. And then renewals, something like customer-only webinars would be something that would be a little bit more adoption related. And I think as you look at this model, and as we go deeper, you can argue any one of these. Well, I think that's more relationship than reach. I think that's more upsell than renewal. The point is, you need to think about what these programs are really for. Now, this is a very company-centric view. This is me thinking about my company's view of the world. And this would be the sort of thing you could easily share within the organization. And what you'll find very quickly is there are a lot of people doing customer engagement, which to me, and Lisa talked about that is sort of the big picture. There's customer engagement, and under it would be advocacy, marketing, experience, which we'll look at a little bit later. And there'll be different parts of the organization that will do some of these engagement models. And one thing I've done within the organizations, we do it, once a quarter, we bring all the customer sort of facing people together, just have a meeting, making sure we're all in sync, making sure somebody isn't starting to do something that somebody else is already midway through. So it's important to bring that group of people together because, I'm a one-man band. Even if I had 5 people, I couldn't be doing all the customer-facing activities. There are other things that happen within the organization. So let's dive in a little deeper into some of the programs. So in that lower left corner, sort of low reach, low relationship, you see some of these different sorts of programs. And again, you could argue that, I think doesn't belong there, but you get a feel for this is where this program and where it lives in your organization might be a little bit different. Then in the upper left-hand corner, those high relationship, but don't reach a lot of people, you'll see things like beta programs, cabs, which will be talked about the next session, testimonials. One thing that I have played with, have never been successful at, but I am going to be successful at it someday, is high touch resources. So there are some companies that are your top 5, 10 companies that, I've always believed that customer marketing should be creating some things just for them. So for example, if you do a newsletter, why not do a co-branded newsletter for that company that maybe you have 100, 200, 300 users at? So it's the XYZ company and your company's newsletter. It's just not the generic newsletter. And maybe that first article, sort of the argument or the conversation I would have with my primary contact at the company is, hey, if you write that first article that talks about how you're using my product, I will in return give you a bespoke newsletter. So everything else will be the same that everyone else gets, so not a lot of work. But what I'd be asking you, the customer, is to create that opening that opening article, and the only audience will be people within your company. We wouldn't send it to, obviously, to others. So I think some bespoke resources is something worth looking at. In the lower right-hand corner, those high reach, newsletter. One thing I want to point out is login pages. To me, in most products people have to log into, and that is incredibly valuable real estate. Look at Salesforce's login page. On the right-hand side, they'll have 2 or 3 messages about upcoming events, products, thought leadership, whatever it be. That is incredibly valuable real estate. And I would really encourage, and think about your company, is what's on the login page, does customer marketing or marketing have any access to that to be able to communicate things like product updates or whatever it might be. If not, that's one of those, is the window open? Figure out if the window's open, make the case to put that, to have that panel on the right-hand side. Again, just look at Salesforce. And if you send that to people, everyone will go, oh my God, now I understand what's going on here. Oops, sorry. And then the sweet spot is the upper right-hand corner. Those programs that reach a lot of people and also develop relationships. User group meetings, annual conferences, advocacy, benchmark reports. Those are the type of things that, if you have a user group meeting with 50 people, next year it's 100 people, it's not twice as much work. And some of these things obviously connect. So like the annual conference, that's when you might want to do your annual awards ceremony. So we're talking about doing that, next year, and you would launch it. And I've done it very successfully in other companies I've been at. You launch it in February, March. There's a whole process, and the winners, get to come to the annual conference. Maybe you fly them out. They get to be up on the stage, tell their story. There's so many benefits to doing an awards contest if your product lends itself to awards. Not all products do, and you just have to, this is not an exhaustive list of the type of programs, but it's pretty complete. And you might, and this is not what we do at our company. This is very aspirational in that, does somebody do all of these? No, but pick and choose the ones that sort of make sense. 2 or 3 from each of those areas. As far as what you're thinking about adding to for next year. So that's sort of the view from us thinking about ourselves. I would never show this to a customer, but I might show this to a customer. So what is the view from the customer? So at what stage? And I just picked some of the programs from the prior slide, just to show that you can show to the customer, hey, here are the programs that we have in our customer marketing program. These are the ones that are going to be early in your life cycle. These are the ones that might be later in your life cycles. Like, customer award, somebody's got to be a customer for a year to submit it to an award, unless you have a new customer category, and then a new customer would submit. But they have to have used the product, etc. And there's some things that exist from day one to the day they end. So support, being involved in, if you have a community, engaging in the community would be something that would go through a company's entire life cycle. So this being something I would show to a customer with the type of program, so they know when they might want to engage with different types of things. The Academy is an example where, in theory, they would use it all the time because new employees would go to your learning resources. But it's much more of a first 6 months of their life cycle is when that company will use it the heaviest. So let's go back to that original map, which talks about that. How do you define where a customer is on that maturity model? So where we are on our own customer marketing maturity model. So if the programs that you're running are newsletters, you invite customers to webinars, I'd say you're early stage, and you can read the rest of these. On the other hand, if you've got an executive briefing center doing some bespoke internal marketing, like that example I gave earlier about an internal newsletter for one of your customers, then you're getting aligned with that customer, and that shows a lot of maturity. Now, in reality, if anyone looks at this, in some areas you'll be very mature, some you'll be less mature. One thing I did want to talk about is in customer-centric customer webinars. I think it's really important to have, early on, you'll find that you invite customers to existing webinars. I think a really good sign that you're moving that ball forward in maturity is once your company starts doing customer-only webinars, because you talk to customers differently than you would talk to prospects. And this summer we had a major release, and we did a prospect webinar and a customer webinar on the exact same topic, but 70% of the content was the same, but 30% of it is very different because you talk to customers differently than prospects. Then there's sort of that internal alignment. Earlier I talked about herding the internal cats can be harder than the external cats. So, those people, and I've heard in the first 2 days people talking about, I'm assigned to, I'm a marketing person, I do demand gen, now I'm assigned to customer marketing. There's no formal budget. All the content is nothing customer specific content. It's whatever gets given to sales, that's what we give to customers. As you start, moving into, well, you're hiring your first customer marketing person, you've got some, marketing funds, you're starting to create some of your own customer-focused content, not just prospect-focused content. You're moving along a little bit further. You're starting to get aligned across your organization. You've got that login page. You're working with the content creators directly to not just repurpose sales content, but to create content from scratch, right, for customers. And then, as you're, internally, maybe now there's a director of a 3 or 4 person team. They're reporting to a C-level person. Customers are starting to create content. Then, those things, the C-level people are very focused on the customers. Then you're starting to see that alignment. Tools, I think you could just look at this. It's pretty obvious what those tools would be. Salesforce would be, that integrate with CRM. Slap5, a CrowdAdvocate, and Influentive would be, customer and company centric. When you start pulling data from your platform, and starting to use it from customer marketing, doing some in-app messaging on your platform with a Pendo or an Intercom, and that integration with your platform, now you're starting to get very mature. And then the keywords, you look at what people say, and it's our product, our company, that really says we're pretty immature. When you start talking about you and your company, and you start using words like, our champions, thought leadership, as opposed to renewal rate and references, and that we're all siloed. As you move along the maturity model, segmentation would be, really a key indicator that, not all customers get the same message at the same time. And then when you start thinking about, customer-led, data-driven, customer experience, that's when you're moving into that maturity, into the final level of that maturity model. And sometimes you go backwards also. Things get de-emphasized. Things change at your companies. But the goal is, if every year you were to move, if you were to measure yourself and say, for those people who are early stage, in 2021, all I want to do is going from customer-centric to from company-centric to customer-centric. 2 years from now, I'll get to alignment. The third model is the series decisions model. So Lisa would certainly know this. And so let me just show all of it at once. I didn't want to show it initially because it could be. And so I think the reds and yellows and greens are not on the series model. But what you'll find is if you do this, and some of it's a little confusing, you have to read some of the serious literature to understand exactly what they're talking about. But this makes a lot of sense. And I sort of randomly just picked red, green, and yellow. Generally in these B2B companies, customer success comes first. So you would imagine it would be more mature. Our customer success organization is more mature than our customer marketing. They'd have a lot of green, a little yellow, and maybe very little red, hopefully a little red. Customer marketing usually comes on a little bit later. So down at the bottom, basic, a lot of green, but as we start getting more advanced, you're starting to see reds and yellows. The third is customer experience, which tends to come last at a B2B company. At a B2C company, customer experience would be first, but at a B2B company, it generally comes last. You see a lot more red. So it's, as you sort of think about, what you want to add program-wise, it's worth taking that series model, and just having an honest assessment with yourself or with those other customer facing people and say, where are we? And, then this is something you might show to management because it's a serious decision model. It's not Irwin's model of, where programs are at and you would argue it belongs here or there. It's serious decisions model. So that's a great model, to look at. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation. So there were 3 models, but I do want to go back to the question, which is now that you've seen maturity models, seen some examples, how would you rate yourself? So I'm going to stop sharing. And Jeff, if you could put this other slide up. And I don't know if I'll try to remember what people, interesting. I don't know if people can see this yet. Can people see this?
You made them feel better, Erwin.
They should be able to.
Okay, I can't tell what people see. I'm going to end the polling now. So now that people have seen it, they've actually rated themselves a little bit higher.
Yep.
I would have guessed the opposite, frankly. I would have guessed people thought that they were funnier and smarter than they really are. And then when they see the reality, they go, oh my God, I'm really not. But this is interesting. So this is good data. And the final thing is that we talked about some groups. So I'm intensely focused on customer upsell. And if there are people who are really sort of struggling with or mastered the customer upsell component of customer marketing, I would love to have a sidebar conversation. A lot of for example, I'm actually doing email marketing campaigns and webinars, etc. I'm deep into the customer upsell element of it. We manage other programs, of course. We're a decentralized model, so other parts of the organization do this as well. But for people who are either entering customer upsell or experiencing the customer upsell, would love to pull, afterwards, a small subgroup together to share stories and best practices.
And for sure, Erwin, that's on our list of cohorts, is customer upsell and cross-sell, because it came up as a big topic when Lisa was talking on Monday.
Yeah. So any questions, Jeff or Dana, before we hand it off to Howard? We're right on time, so that's good news.
No, why don't you keep going, and then we'll get some more questions. We'll round up some questions as we go.
I'll look at the chat. Howard, it's all yours, my man.
All right, thank you, sir. Let me get my share up and running. Hopefully that does the job. And let me shrink this down a little bit. Okay. So look, Erwin has just shown us how to turn the camera on ourselves, right? With a very pragmatic approach to assessing where we are today and some next logical steps to take. I've taken a very different approach. I'd now like to offer a broader, perhaps somewhat more aspirational perspective on a few ways to parlay deep customer knowledge and experience into broader responsibilities. So on Tuesday, Evan, Kalina, and Nick talked about the nonlinear nature of customer marketing career paths and how they can prepare you for executive opportunities. And then on Wednesday, Heather, Sarah, Victoria, and Amanda discussed how to help key stakeholders across your organization achieve their goals so you can achieve yours. They all highlighted a key strength of CustomerX Pro Rockstars, and that's the ability to provide an integrative perspective. Some people describe this as having the ability to play three-dimensional chess or thinking in multiple dimensions at the same time. However you choose to describe it, integrative thinking is what executives do every day. And your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to find a way to help them by leveraging your deep customer knowledge and capacity for integrative thinking. Now, you do this by first recognizing that most executives have a short list of complex problems they need to solve today, or perhaps yesterday. I've worked for a couple of guys like that. If you can determine what those problems are, you can then demonstrate how your knowledge and programs can help solve them. And this is how you get aligned with the executive agenda and with strategic growth initiatives. So let me take you through an example of this. We've talked about the increasing importance of customer retention during the pandemic and probably beyond, right? Clearly, this is either an existing or an anticipated problem for many organizations. Here's a way that you might get ahead of that. On Monday, I shared this provocative question. If most organizations believe in customer centricity, why are so many customers still dissatisfied? Now, it's designed to promote the idea that A, most organizations are customer-centric in name only, and B, for those that have achieved some degree of customer centricity, well, that's not the end of the journey, right? And there's still a lot more to do. It's the kind of question that gets an executive thinking about how this applies to their own organization. And you can use a broad question like this as a jumping off point to demonstrate both your deep customer knowledge and your capacity for integrative thinking. Now, yesterday, Allison made the point that it's the little things that matter, right? We've all felt like this guy at one time or another, right? And when it's a particularly frustrating story, we share it with many other folks. So let's just do a little exercise here, right? Let's see how quickly you can recall a situation or scenario that frustrated you. Just type in the chat box what some of the top pet peeves are you've experienced with companies. Just type them into the chat. And I've just realized that when I do that, I can't see the chat. Erwin, you want to help me out here? What are people putting in there? You're on mute, Erwin.
Yeah, I got it. Lip service, being on hold on the phone, then getting disconnected.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. It's always a fun exercise to do that. But the thing to remember is there's gold to be mined when your customers have these experiences.
Being passed around.
Being passed around. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so there's always gold to be mined from these things. And you know, we talked a lot about interviewing customers to capture the positive aspects of our interactions with them. Understanding the negative aspects is equally important. So by integrating customer insights obtained from your various customer marketing initiatives, from research, and of course, from the new knowledge you've gained from your peers at CustomerX Con 2020, you can help your executives understand why customers are still so dissatisfied. And I'll leave it to you to kind of go through this. You know, this is an example of putting things into 4 buckets, right? Increasing customer expectations, declining execution effectiveness, losing control of the narrative, or hidden dissatisfaction. But let's focus in on 1 or 2 of these. And somebody just touched on it with the input. Be honest. How do you feel when you call a customer support line and have to sit through the recording of just how important your call is to them, only to be put on hold with no idea of how long you're going to have to wait? Last time I checked, this is 2020, and wait time estimators are readily available at an inexpensive price. So when companies don't put that in place, for me, this fails 2 of the increasing customer expectations, right? The support modern technologies expectation, and more importantly, the respect my time expectation. Or we can talk about hidden dissatisfaction, right? How many of your dissatisfied customers announce their intention to leave? I'll bet if you're like everybody else, it's very few. They just disappear, leaving you, if you're paying attention, to wonder why your retention rate is falling. Now, you might think this is a somewhat negative perspective, and who really wants to be associated with presenting that to an executive? But I'll assure you that executives view complex problems as negatives. And what you need to do is help them see the items on their complex problem list, right? Not just as complex problems, but as things you can help them resolve. So I don't know if you've ever seen this chart before. It's one that really makes this point very, very well. It's the
Hey, Howard?
Yeah.
Could you put yourself on presenter mode? The top part of your screen is flickering.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks.
Yeah, I was waiting for a moment to do that.
The slideshow from current slide. Does that solve it?
Much better, thank you.
Ah, thanks. Thanks, Erwin. Appreciate that. And if somebody was trying to get through on the chat, tell me that. I'm sorry I didn't see it. So yeah, so this is the old Wayne Dyer quote, right? That if you change the way you look at things, right, the things you look at will change. And you can help them do exactly that. So what you need to do that is a model. And when I get into these kind of discussions, I like to work from this McKinsey model that's been around for a while. I like it primarily because it shows the interdependencies across all aspects of an organization, right? So many times initiatives fail because change was attempted in one aspect of this, but none of the others were aligned. And I'm sure, I don't care what size company you're in, you've experienced something like that along the way. The other thing I like about it is it can be applied at the top of the business, or it can be applied at a departmental level to understand and pinpoint exactly where the problems are. So if you take this model and you apply it to the question I posed about customer centricity, you can come up with yet another maturity curve. And so here's one that I developed about maybe a year and a half ago. It's been updated based on input from discussions with Jeff and from customers as well. And this is talking about, this is what makes the point that customer centricity isn't the end of the journey. I should add that some folks have suggested I left off the first column here, which is the column that would be titled Customer Ignorant. But I kind of decided that this was not going to be very productive to have that column on the chart. But as you can see, I've listed the McKinsey model elements as row headers. And I've come up with a maturity model basically that says you move from being customer aware to customer responsive to customer centric to customer fluent, which is a term some of you have used in your presentations over the last couple of days, all the way to being customer led. And you know, we can look across this chart at any level. Like I said, if you think about strategy, when you're customer aware, you're pushing product, you're selling offerings, right? If you move on to recognizing that you've got this thing called a customer and it might make some sense to be responsive to them, well, what you're trying to do is inform them about how your products can help. When you get to the customer-centric level of maturity, you're doing a lot of analytics. You're really trying to understand, you're doing business intelligence, and maybe if you're advanced, you're doing some predictive analytics. Customer fluency is a little bit different. You've really moved on to speaking the customer's language, and you're beginning to think in terms of how you can integrate your strategy with theirs. And at the end of the day, back to that notion of the complex problem list that all executives have, basically, you're figuring out how to fix those problems across both companies. You can see the same thing on structure. We go from being a very tightly aligned hierarchical kind of structure in a company that's early in the process to being one that by the time they're customer centric is usually feeling the effects of being siloed and having siloed metrics that they have to contend with. And so one of the things that then occurs is you start putting a chief customer officer or a chief growth officer or chief revenue in place to begin to take those silos and put them back together so you can do the right thing by the customer. By the time you get to being customer led, you're almost borderless. You can look at people working on a problem and not even tell which company they actually work for. And we could step all the way through this, but I think you get the point, and I'd be happy to discuss this with anyone going forward. Just either contact me during the conference or afterwards. So let's go from there. I called an audible last night when I was reviewing these charts. So I wanted to give you this notion that if you do this at a departmental level or a business function level, you really can pinpoint whether it's the strategy or the structure or the systems or what the skill level is that your people have. That's the problem to solve. And obviously, that's how you're demonstrating integrative thinking, right? That's how you demonstrate your value beyond just your function at the executive level. Now, what I'd like to do is share one more idea that I've been kicking around for a while. And I want to thank Heather and Sarah and Victoria and Amanda for kind of re-sparking this yesterday. I asked a question during their session about getting all the various stakeholders on the same page, right? And their answer was basically it's hard, which is absolutely true. But I think it's hard because for many stakeholders, they have a different perspective, right? Back to that Wayne Dyer chart. They lack a shared view of the customer's perspective or their authentic voice. So the thought I've been kicking around for a year is, can't we provide a shared perspective for them? And what I've come up with is an idea I call customer improv. Right? Now, customer improv is an initiative that's designed, right, to increase what I call customer EQ, right, with the goal of improving organizational alignment so that you drive acquisition and retention. And you've probably seen or heard about improv training at corporations where they bring their staff together and teach them improv techniques. Perhaps you've even been fortunate enough to experience it. I think there's a great opportunity to apply this concept to customer marketing. It basically, when you do it with most companies, they do it only with their own staff. My notion here is that you bring the customer into this. You bring customers who have positive and negative experiences in, and you map out what the experience was, and you use that through improv as a training mechanism for your people. I really think that bringing them together in a workshop has benefits both for the customer and for the company. And what it does for your team is it increases their confidence and commitment and even courage, which is what's needed at times, to replace the things they know customers hate with outstanding customer experiences. So for those of you who've done any work in learning, this kind of replaces the more traditional role play capabilities that exist. And it really gets your people up to speed on this notion of rehearsing for spontaneity or being prepared for the unprepared. So, I'll do one more chart on this and just say there's a lot of benefits that can accrue from this, whether it's improved rapport and relationship with the customer, whether it's achieving that alignment across the stakeholders, which I absolutely think will pay tremendous dividends for customer marketing. Back to the moments of truth, like the Caleb story we saw yesterday, you can make those more impactful based on these kinds of exercises. And certainly there's lots of things you can do to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your own firm. So Jeff, I'm throwing this out there. I don't know, I'd love people's comments on this. It's something that if people are interested in, I'd love to perhaps park in the CustomerX lab as something we begin to experiment with. Okay. My take is this would move to get the stakeholders all on the same page and give them a visceral sense of the authentic customer voice. Oh, and if you'd rather not involve the customer, that's fine too. You can actually have some of your own people, your own employees, play the customer. And trust me, that's a role they will revel in, right? They'll do probably a very effective job there. So yeah, that's my story on this idea. And like I say, I'd welcome thoughts and comments and see if this works to take us forward. So that's it. Two ways to look at how you drive maturity beyond the customer marketing function to improve your career. Thanks much. Any questions? I'm going to come out of this mode now so I can see what we got here.
So I have a question for you guys while we're waiting for some people to type in or speak up. So what are you seeing as some of the biggest barriers to advancing on the maturity curve, or to the next stage of the maturity model? And because I know that's one of the things people always feel like there are things holding them back, but sometimes some of those things, there's ways to work through them if they're just armed with the right tactics, the right guidance, and the confidence to do so.
I think the first thing is to do an honest assessment as to where you are, whichever format you want to choose, doesn't really matter, but, to assess it working with others in the organization. And then I think if you present it that way, I don't know if any manager, director, C-level person would not say, oh, we have a customer marketing program, and how do we make it better? How do we make it more mature? And I think if you think about it this way and also present it during annual planning, it begins to just make it easier for everyone to understand that these are the things that we want to do to go forward. And some of it obviously gets into resources, because that'll be the next question. Well, okay, we want to go from level 1 to 2. Some CEO might say we want to go from level 1 to 4. And it's like, okay, the resources to go to 1 to 4 means we have to hire 3 or 4 more people and get this technology and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I think if you present it to management as this is where we're at, we just want to go one step further. So we need to add a part-time person to do this. We need to buy this piece of technology. I think it's an easier way to explain it than just an ad hoc, we want to start doing this. Where does it fit within the whole picture of the whole organization, not just customer marketing? Because like I said earlier, there are other parts of the organization do customer marketing, and that could cause a map like that could cause a realignment as well. It's like, well, why is this group doing all this customer marketing? Let's shift some of those resources over to customer marketing as well. So in some cases, it could be shifting. In some other cases, it could be increasing resources and potentially headcount.
That's great. And another thing is if you think about, depending on the model, and you guys showed a couple of different models and ways of thinking about this, but just because you're not always leaving things behind at a prior stage as you move forward, right? Depending on how the model is designed. I mean, it's almost like in some cases we're accumulating more strategic focus and strategic activities in truly customer-led activities, but not really letting go of things that are behind us. So I imagine that's also a constraint for people, is just pure bandwidth, because I know that was some of the feedback I got from people on Monday when we were talking about connecting your strategic and to your work to the strategic growth initiatives of your company. And in addition to the keep your lights on activities, well, people are saying, well, those keep the lights on activities are consuming all my time. And you know, where do I have time to start to focus on some of these things?
Yeah, in some cases, it's a sunsetting some programs. It's like, well, is the newsletter really, you know, it takes me 3 days to do the newsletter, you know, only 10% open, you know, what make believe, is it really worth it? Maybe we should be doing, you know, monthly customer webinars that we get, you know, much deeper with on a topic. So a lot of it's an honest assessment of you know, what's working, what isn't working. Asha talked about, you know, using relevant customer data. I mean, that's the core of all this is you know, is the data to measure the engagement, not just with your platform or with your programs. And so,
Right.
and that's where you decide, is it really worth all this work for 25 people?
Yeah, and I would simply add to that the degree to which you can get yourself working on that short list of complex problems, this becomes more of a discussion in the aggregate, you know, in an integrative manner than all the individual programs that you do. So yeah, it's probably hard to wrap your head around 50 programs, but if you're working off that short list, even though you may have elements of those 50 programs in solving it, it becomes an easier task to manage.
Right, and there's a couple of chat comments now that are relating to this issue as well around, you know, I think we all as practitioners, we want to advance on the maturity curve clearly, and we're learning and inspiring each other, and we already have a lot of ideas even before coming to this conference about things we want to do. But you know, one thing that I've heard from a lot of people as I'm trying to help them mature their program is they say, well, my executives are just so grounded in or just so used to asking for the traditional things that may not be the most effective things that we could be doing. And one of the things that I say to them is, okay, well, why don't you meet with those executives and say, well, what's really most important on your plate? Like, what are those most important strategic growth initiatives on your plate? And start to frame some activities that are going to really help with those. And then say to the executive, well, so I could do this to help you with a strategic growth initiative, or I could go get 500 more 5-star reviews on G2, right? Or create 30 more, you know, written PDF case studies in the third person. And so sometimes you just the executive mindsets need to be shifted as well to you know, to start to realize what the potential is from these programs, because they're probably not used to some of the outputs and deliverables that come out of the stages 4 and 5, or, you know, 3 and 4 if there was a 4-stage maturity model, right? They're not even aware that those things are possible sometimes.
Yeah, and the other thing I would try to allocate some time just personally, you know, even if it's just 5% for experimentation. You know, you can do some skunk work things, try some things out without it becoming an official program. So you can, you know, is there a way within your organization to dip your toes into trying something out that might be, you know, or at least doing the research. Hey, here's what the data is telling us. You know, maybe we should be trying this out, and, you know, give me a green light to do it for 6 months, and we'll come back to and see if it works. Because, you know, you know, the one thing we all know is each one of us is different. So nobody could just take one company's program and forklift it over and say, we're just going to do it the same way.
Right.
Right. Jeff, Allison's brought up a comment about the customer improv that I'd like to address.
Sure.
And it's basically a discussion that while this could probably help from the ground up, the question is, how do you get this coming from the top down? And Allison, what I would say to that is, yeah, look, it's never easy, right? To get up to the top. And I think somebody else has also made reference to that as well. I think it was Alice. Oh, this is another point from Allison. It's like pushing through concrete. The fact of the matter is, you know, we used the example of that having to wait on hold when I did the first half of my pitch. Let's take that a little bit further. we've all been on calls where we know if the executive, if the vice president of marketing was sitting there listening to that call and hearing what we as a customer were being told, they would be livid, right? They would be highly motivated to fix that problem immediately. And if they're savvy, it's not about firing a person in the call center. It's about figuring out what went wrong with the process that allowed that to happen. And it's probably multiple elements. So to the degree that you can identify situations, this is why I focus a lot on negative situations more than the positive ones, right? Because those are the ones that cause that hidden dissatisfaction and cause customers to walk away and say, I'm never calling them back again. So it won't answer the question in every case, but that's part of the discussion, I think.
Let me just thank Erwin and thank Howard for showing us these models. I mean, it's fantastic. I think some of them are things people should print out and put up on their pin to their wall, because it's something that we always need to be concentrated on and making sure that we're thinking about how are we going to elevate our game and what does it mean to go to the next level.